All right, today we're going to dive into a pretty big idea. It's something that, according to some, is the invisible foundation holding up the entire American Republic. We're going to explore the claim that its decline might just explain a lot of the deep divisions we see all around us. So let's get into it. So what is it? Really, what's the one thing holding the whole American experiment together? You hear a lot of different answers, right? The Constitution, the economy, a shared culture. Well, the source we're looking at today says it's something way more fundamental than all that. It's a specific idea about what it actually means to be a human being. And where are we getting this? Our guide for this explainer is a work called Withered Leaves and Spoiled Fruits by Christine Jones. She's an independent researcher who, after 25 years in education, really dedicated her work to this question. Jones argues that at the absolute heart of our current conflicts is a fundamental disagreement over the very nature of what a person is. And that leads us right into our first section, America's invisible foundation. The argument here is that what we're all seeing and calling political instability, well, that's just a symptom. The real disease, she says, is the erosion of a core belief about humanity itself. So here's the core argument. The real battle happening today isn't left versus right. No, it's a fight over a forgotten moral claim. It's this idea that there is something fixed, something unchangeable at the core of every human being, and that this something puts a hard, non-negotiable limit on the power of any government or any system. Okay, so what was this original idea? What was this specific worldview that the American founders were apparently relying on? This next section is all about unpacking what our source calls the founders' human blueprint. The key term here, and it's a big one, is moral anthropology. Now, this isn't some vague, feel-good sentiment. It's a very precise definition of human nature. It's the bedrock, the foundation, that makes a phrase like inalienable rights actually mean something. Without it, the source argues, those are just powerful-sounding words, ink on paper with no real force behind them. So here they are, the 4 pillars of that moral anthropology. First up, the belief that human nature is fixed. It's not infinitely moldable. Second, that our ability to reason and our conscience are generally reliable guides. Third, that because of this, moral limits are real things that we can actually know. And finally, and this is the big payoff, because those 3 things are true, all earthly authority is secondary. It's derivative, and it has to be restrained. Now, this isn't just about personal religion. It's a specific, binding view of the human person that the entire system of government was built on. So, what happens when the very institutions that are supposed to teach and uphold this view start to change their tune? Our next section, When the Pillars Crumble, looks at how this foundation has, well, crumbled over time. Let's start with theology. Originally, the idea of being made in God's image, the imago Dei, wasn't just a nice thought. It meant there was a fixed moral structure inside a person that had real-world political consequences. But according to Jones, modern theology has often weakened that idea, turning it into something about inner belief or social activism, which strips it of its power to put hard limits on the state. Then you have the shift in education. And wow, it's just as stark. The goal used to be to form self-governing citizens, moral agents who understood their own worth and responsibility. Now the focus is often on administering populations, teaching students to see themselves mostly as products of systems, of incentives, of their environment. In that kind of framework, a concept like an inalienable right, well, it becomes almost impossible to even understand. And of course, this way of thinking flows directly into the legal system. See, when your rights are anchored to a fixed, unchangeable human nature, they're absolute, they're solid. But once you cut that anchor loose, rights just become a balancing act. They become subject to the whims of judges, regulators, and ever-changing conditions. They're no longer inalienable, they're negotiable. Okay, so you have these key pillars, theology, education, law, all weakened, all shifting. So what are the real-world consequences for how we're governed? Let's take a look at what happens when you try to govern without this foundation. What you get is a kind of domino effect, a logical chain reaction. Step 1, you remove the foundation, that idea of a fixed human nature. Step 2, the concept of inalienable rights stops making sense. It becomes unintelligible. Step 3, the whole purpose of government quietly shifts from protecting citizens to managing populations. And the final, chilling step in this progression, humans come to be seen as programmable, as raw material to be shaped by the state. And this isn't some far-off, abstract threat. The source argues that this view of humanity, as infinitely malleable, as something to be engineered, is already deeply embedded in our society. Once that belief takes hold, pretty much every solution that gets proposed, from policy to technology, will start from the assumption that people are just raw material to be shaped for the greater good. All of this brings us to our final section, which uses a really powerful metaphor to capture the weirdness of our current situation: arguing for air. Think about that metaphor. It's perfect, right? In a healthy society, you don't have to argue for the existence of air. You don't have public debates about whether we need it to breathe. You just breathe it. It's assumed. In the same way, the fundamental understanding of what a person is should be so deeply woven into a culture that it's just assumed in everything, in law, in education, and how we treat each other. And this quote from Christine Jones really just drives the point home. The fact that we are having to name the ground of freedom already tells us something has gone very wrong. The very act of having to have this conversation, of having to define and defend this most basic idea, well, that's a symptom of a really deep crisis. It's like a fish having to argue for the existence of water. And so we're left with this final, really provocative question. This is the ultimate takeaway from this whole analysis. If a society completely loses its shared understanding of what a human being is, if we forget that invisible foundation, then what exactly is left to defend? It's a question that really challenges us to look past the daily noise and re-examine the very bedrock of our society.